The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943 and the resistance that it showed provides an example of the best way to behave in the darkest of days. The anniversary of this event is a special day for Warsaw. So why do we commemorate it, and why should the world maintain this memory? In the enormity of the Second World War, it was a small but undoubtedly shining episode. So join me, Jan Darasz, for how we got here.
Today, on the 19th of April, the world commemorates the 81st anniversary of the 1943 Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Germans forced over 400,000 Jews within the walled-in area of the Warsaw Ghetto they had established in 1940. In the ghetto, tens of thousands of people died of starvation and disease. The daily caloric value of food rations in the Warsaw Ghetto in late 1940, early 1941 was around 200 calories per person. In comparison, at that time, the value for Poles was about 700 calories and 2,600 for Germans. On the 22nd of July 1942, the so-called Great Liquidation Action began. Within a 2-month period, the Germans deported nearly 300,000 ghetto residents to their deaths in the Treblinka extermination camp. As the deportations continued, despair gave way to resistance. A newly formed group, the Jewish Fighting Organization, slowly took effective control of the ghetto. In the autumn of 1942, mere 60,000 Jews remained in the remnants of the ghetto. They were mostly young and strong single men, often employed at German workshops. With nothing left to lose, the idea of an armed resistance against the Nazis was born amongst the Jewish youth in the Warsaw Ghetto. On April 19th, Heinrich Himmler launched a special operation to clear the ghetto in honor of Adolf Hitler's birthday, which fell on the next day, April 20th. April 19th was also the first day of Passover, the Jewish holiday celebrating freedom from slavery in Egypt. Before dawn, 2,000 SS men and German armed troops moved into the area with tanks and rapid-fire artillery. While most of the remaining Jews hid in bunkers, some 1,500 strong Jewish insurgents opened fire from their prized weapons: pistols, a few rifles, one machine gun and homemade bombs, destroying a number of tanks, killing German troops and holding off reinforcements trying to enter the ghetto. The Germans withdrew in the evening. The next day, the fighting resumed and casualties mounted. The Germans used gas, police dogs and flamethrowers in an effort to rout the Jews from their bunkers, leaving the city under a pall of smoke for days. On the third day, the Germans' tactics shifted. They made a decision to burn down the entire ghetto. Jürgen Strupp, who led the German units during the uprising, wrote in his report on the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto that his soldiers had captured or killed over 56,000 Jews and located 631 bunkers. According to Strupp's report, 36,000 people were deported to labor camps in the Lublin province, while the rest were killed on the spot or in the gas chambers of the death camp in Treblinka.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Franciszek Bojańczyk of the Polish Museum of the History of Polish Jews. Welcome to the programme.
Have a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you along. We commemorate what's called the Warsaw Uprising, the first one in 1943. We'll talk about that later, but let's sketch in the historical background first. What was it and why was it launched, or why was the response made like it was?
Well, in order to understand what happened 81 years ago, on April 19th, 1943, we have to go back in history into 1940, when the Warsaw Ghetto was established by the Germans. It was established in fall of 1940, and it became the largest ghetto in Nazi-occupied Europe. At its peak in 1941, there were 450,000 people in the Warsaw Ghetto that occupied a very small part of the capital of Poland. In 1942, after 100,000 of people had perished because of hunger, because of the conditions in the Warsaw Ghetto, malnutrition, starvation, Germans started another phase of the ghetto destruction. It started in July 1942, and within 2 months, Germans deported to the death camp of Treblinka around 300,000 people. So by 1943, most women and men of the ghetto in Warsaw had been already killed, mostly in Treblinka. Only a very small part, but we're still talking about dozens of thousands of people, around 50,000 people. Only those people were left in the Warsaw Ghetto. Some of them were working at the different facilities created by the Germans for the German war industry, producing different things for Wehrmacht. Others were just living in the underground. So a part of that group of people rebelled on April 19th, 1943, after most of the ghetto was already destroyed.
This was just a final phase of clearing out the ghetto of the remaining Jewish inhabitants. And what happened, as I understand it, it was a rebellion, or it was a resistance, armed resistance in the first few days, and then thereafter, after the month, it was a series of small-scale ambushes and skirmishes. Is that how it
Very much
looked?
so. On April 19th, which is actually the beginning of Pesach, one of the most important Jewish holidays, German forces surrounded the Warsaw Ghetto. Around 2,000 soldiers, well armed with vehicles, with tanks, with the support from the air. They surrounded the remaining part of the Warsaw Ghetto. And people inside the Warsaw Ghetto, members of two resistance organizations, they had already been informed and alarmed by the Polish resistance that something is happening. So the moment the Germans entered the ghetto, they encountered resistance from the Jewish side. But as you said, only the first days of the uprising were the days of fight, because of a simple fact that there were not enough guns inside the Warsaw Ghetto. It was close to impossible to fight a well-trained, well-prepared German army. And after this initial phase of the ghetto uprising, Germans started, under a new command of Jürgen Stroop, they started a new phase of basically burning down the whole neighborhood. And they managed to do so. Most of the buildings in the Warsaw Ghetto were either burned down, destroyed from within using explosives. And we can only imagine what happened with people who were inside. They were either forced to leave their homes, and they were marched to the Umschlagplatz, from which they were deported to different camps, or they died within the buildings, inside the building.
Okay, so one more historical question. This was the ending of the Jewish uprising in the ghetto, was in some way the ending of the final chapter in the history of Warsaw's Jews. This rather magnificent great synagogue was blown up. Could you tell us a bit about how the memorialization started to be memorialized in post-war Jewish and Polish history?
Sure, but one thing we have to have in mind is that this is how the Germans wanted us to think about the uprising. Jürgen Stroop, in his infamous report, wrote after the destruction of the synagogue, of the Great Synagogue, that there is no longer a Jewish living quarter in Warsaw. Now, in fact, there were some Jewish survivors of the uprising, and also people who were living on the so-called Aryan side. So some people survived the destruction of Jewish Warsaw. There were even people who lived in the ruins of the ghetto until early 1944. So there were Jews in Warsaw, obviously a small fraction of the Jewish community of the pre-war times. And after the end of the war, after the so-called liberation of Warsaw in 1945, there were survivors coming to the city of Warsaw, not only from the suburbs of the city, but also from the camps, from distant parts of the Soviet Union. And there was a Jewish life rebuilt in the city of Warsaw. The first monument of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was created already in April 1946. Yeah. And then 2 years after, in 1948, there was yet another one, the big one, in front of which we're having the ceremony today. So a lot was happening in the post-war Poland. Now, the dramatic change was that, first of all, there were not that many people who survived the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, the Holocaust. But second of all, in 1949, because of political reasons, many Jews of Poland were forced to emigrate.
Yes.
And after that, the Jewish life in Poland, although it remained, was very, very limited.
Let's talk about the remembrance of the event now. You and I are wearing these daffodils today. Could you tell us a bit about why we're doing this and what the significance of this particular flower is?
Sure. You know, in Warsaw, everybody 10, 15 years ago, while asked about the uprising, would say you one thing. It's the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Now, because of this particular project, because of daffodils, because of what the Polish Museum has been doing for 12 years already, we now see that many people here in Warsaw, around the country, but also around the globe, start to realize that there was another uprising in 1943, which was the largest act of Jewish resistance during the Second World War. And now we know that in Warsaw there were two Warsaw Risings, one in 1943 and the other one in 1944. So by wearing this very simple symbol, we are making this rising of April and May 1943 an important part of the history of Warsaw.
And how does the Polish Museum celebrate in other ways? That celebrates every year. What are the chief events that happen during this time?
For us, it's very important to make this anniversary, this campaign, something that becomes part of our lives. It's not only about leaving a bunch of flowers in front of the memorial. Is about the gesture of commemorating, of remembering together. This is why we're every year preparing a lot of materials for Polish schools. We are creating videos, short stories for children, for students, to make this uprising known around the country. With some people, some groups, we can't talk about the Holocaust in a direct way. We can't, or we rather don't want to talk about the Holocaust in primary schools. But what we can do is distribute materials about different values that this anniversary carries with it. And we're very proud of the fact that 1/3 of Polish pupils in Polish schools in the whole country are using those materials that we prepare. So this is very important to us.
Is it accurate to say that our celebration is generally Warsaw-centric? The wider world perhaps doesn't understand the significance of this month in 1943.
Now, in Warsaw, everything centers around Warsaw because of the obvious fact that the rising happened here, and most of our 14,000 volunteers that so far has participated in the campaign are from Warsaw, are handing out paper daffodils on streets of Warsaw today. But there were other cities in which the campaign is or was visible because of the educational materials that we are preparing, because of various projects that institutions and organizations that are participating in the campaign are doing. So it's visible elsewhere, but we very much want people of other places in Poland to understand, and we're doing that through different projects that we are creating, that there were other ghettos in Poland,
yes.
Not only the Warsaw Ghetto. And it's very important that people of particular town or village understand that there was Jewish life in almost every single corner of the country. We don't want everybody in Poland to know only about this one ghetto. It was the largest one, but Jewish life flourished in the whole country. There
Yes.
were 3.5 million Jews living in Poland as of 1939, and it's very important that we remember every single one of them.
Yes, Łódź, Białystok, for example, the
Exactly.
vibrant and non-existent ghettos. Thank you very much, Franciszek Bojańczyk. That's all the time we have for the programme today, so thanks for coming on to the programme.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it. That's all the time we have. Join us again next time on How We Got Here.